Hello, and welcome to a recording of the world premiere book launch of Michael Anthony's first novel. This book is the first of his trilogy that deals with the life and times of Mary Corbett, secret agent. The first novel is entitled Transmissions, and it covers Mary's early life and her first 2 years of the World War II, when she's recruited to be an agent of the MI8 section of the British Secret Service. The book is dedicated to the 5 men from Michael's village who served and lost their lives during the Second World War. The recording was made on Remembrance Sunday, the 14th of November 2021. I trust you will enjoy watching it. We're going to record it. I couldn't manage a world book launch by the internet because this building is virtually a metal cage, which means, as you probably know, you can't get a telephone signal from the earth for love nor money. So it means we couldn't use it as far as access to the internet and so on. But it is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. So just remember that. Okay? So what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to have I'm going to start with doing the dedication that's in the book. Dr. Sam is going to read the preface. We're going to have a reading, which is one part of the story. We're then going to have we're going to have the preface, then we're going to have a reading, then we're going to have some refreshments, and then we're going to have the second reading, which is another part of the storyline itself. So it'll just progress this way through. I'm going to try and give you some insight or explanation or contextualization as to what where the story is at any one particular point when we come to the readings out the front. So if that's okay. Everybody all right? Okay. So I'm going to start with doing the dedication. And this appears in front of the book. And it's perhaps pertinent or poignant that is today that we're having this launch, because the book is dedicated to the 5 fallen sons of Sutton St. Nicholas. This novel is dedicated to those from the village I call home, who lost their lives and futures in World War II. I never knew them, but I give grateful thanks to the memory and for the great sacrifice that they made. They were Leonard George Atwood, Clifford Nip John Dale, George Robert Morris Garrard, Joseph Leslie Marshall, and Percival Arthur Corrick. And it's great that some of the people who are mentioned there, they still have family and friends living in the village. The Corrick name would be known to many of you, and those of you who know Mike and Mary Hughes. Mary Hughes is in fact the cousin of Nip Dale, as he was known, Nipper Dale. Those are the 5 men who passed away or killed. Okay, so we're going to move on to the first reading. And to give you some contextualization, I'll read this bit. On the 30th of September 1938, the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, addresses a large crowd from the first floor window of 10 Downing Street. To rousing cheers, he announces that his agreement with Hitler will mean peace in our time. Words which, even as he says them, he doubts will turn out to be true. With war almost inevitable, he sends a high-ranking government official to Canada to arrange for the setting up of the Aircrew Training Commonwealth Air Training Plan. Meanwhile, Oxford, the government's official's daughter and his niece are blissfully unaware that by agreeing to accompany him to Canada, they will have their first encounter with the deadly world of espionage. An encounter in which their lives are threatened and where they are saved by the timely intervention from a most unexpected source. As the inevitable war arrives, our heroine is recruited into a new section of the Secret Service, and again her life is put in peril. But that's for the second part. Okay, so we're now going to talk about what happens when we're going to do the preface first. So this will set the scene as to what the book is, how the book is structured.
To date, I have killed 5 people. Though given that I am now well into my 90s and have not killed anyone for over 50 years, it may be safe to assume that I will have no further victims. If, however, I ever find myself in a situation similar to the ones in which I found it necessary to kill those 5, then I believe I would have no qualms in killing again. I appreciate this sounds rather unlikely and somewhat dramatic, but as I had and still have no concerns about having killed those individuals, then I have no reason to expect to have any should the need arise again. Well, now that that matter is out of the way, let me tell you why I have finally given in to my son's long-standing request to allow him to tell the story of my life in the British Secret Service. Firstly, because given the length of time since all these events occurred, it seems most unlikely that anyone still alive will be harmed or upset by my recollection of events. Second, because he continues to say that you were one of the ordinary people who did extraordinary things. I don't accept that this is an accurate description of either myself or my life. From my perspective, and I believe the majority of the individuals who lived through those years, it was just how things were. To my way of thinking, a more accurate description of what people did during World War II was that we just got on with it. What I did insist on was that before covering my time in the Secret Service, that he first described my upbringing. Knowing what that was like, I felt would help readers gain an understanding of the world that shaped me. Without this insight, I believe they would perhaps find it difficult to comprehend why I acted as I did.
Thanks, Doc. So what you've got there is background to how the story came to be written. And that is that the story is being recounted from the lady in question by the name of Mary Corbett, who acted as a secret agent for the British Security Services during the war, and she's recounting it to her son. She's recounted it in 2010, so it's 50 or 60 years after the events. But as she says, she only killed 5 people, but probably not going to kill anybody after that. I would just like to mention at this stage that my mother is called Mary Corbett, and when I mentioned the start of the book, she was most engaged by it. That tells you a lot about my acting. Anyway, okay, so we're going to move on now. The situation is that prior to the war, 1938, Britain was pretty sure there was a war coming, and therefore they needed, in particular, they needed bigger RAF. Planes were ordered, but you needed pilots and aircrew to man them. So the Commonwealth Air Training schools were set up. They were set up in Canada, South Africa, and in Rhodesia, as it was at the time, Zimbabwe now, to train the aircrew obviously away from the front line. And so what we're going to do now is go through the first section, the first reading, which is about the 2 ladies who go to Canada with the member of the government to do that job. He sends them on a trip down to Washington, and they have to come back by car. And the car is driven by a lady who rejoices in the name of Delcora Downey. And Delcora is with us today, or is her granddaughter is with us today. She's going to Regent Park. So what you're going to do now is a little bit of the narrator speak first, and then we're going to actually go through the events of the actual trip back. Okay. So.
After driving for 3 hours or so, I for one was in need of some sleep. So I put my head back and dozed off, and Doc did the same. We woke around 2 hours later when Delcora stopped outside a gas station, as she called it, to buy petrol and use the lavatory. We all stepped out and used the facilities while the attendant filled the tank and the spare petrol tanks that Delcora had brought. Opposite the petrol station was a diner, and having paid for the fuel, we decided we would get something to eat and drink. We walked over and ordered coffees and bacon sandwiches. We were about to leave when Delcora asked us to wait so she could check that the coast was clear. 2 things had attracted her attention. The gas station attendant was not sitting in his office, and there was another car parked up close to the driver's side of the car. Turning to the man behind the counter, she asked,
"Excuse me, sir. When does the gas station usually close for the night?"
Clothes? I reckon it never really does. My guess is that if somebody turned up at any time during the night, old Henry there would be out serving him lickety-split. He's got an old army cot he lays down in the back on so he don't miss a chance to make a sale. Why are you asking?
I can't see him. That seems odd to you.
It does, though the good Lord alone might only know where he is.
Turning to us, Delcora said she needed us to be really alert as we walked back to the car. She would hang back a step or two while we walked across at a normal pace. If anything happened, she wanted us to know that everything she might do would be done with the aim of getting us safely back to Canada. We both responded with nervous nods. Walking as calmly as we could and saying very little, we walked over to the car. As we arrived, a man stepped out of the shadows and walked forward, pointing a gun at us.
Okay, let's not go through any pretense. I know who you are, so step over to my car. Best you make no fuss now, as I only need to take one of you back with me. You understand?
Dot and I moved quickly to his car. Delcora just stood there, and from what I could see, she was wringing her hands and starting to cry.
I ain't got nothing to do with what these two English women is doing, sir. I was just told to drive them north to Canada.
Ah, is that right? So, if I asked you to get me any papers or such they may have brought with them, you'd be happy to do that to help?
Yes, I would, sir. I know they put big envelopes in the trunk. Shall I go get that for you, sir?
Now that would be really helpful of you. I might just see my way to letting you go if you did that to me, so you run along getting me that envelope, girl.
I couldn't help myself and I blurted out, "Don't you dare! You gave us your word you would get us safely to Canada." Replying whilst apparently sobbing her heart out, Delcora shouted back that she had not signed up to be shot and that all she wanted was to get home safe to her children and didn't want anything to do with what we were involved in. The man turned to us and told us to be quiet and get into his car, by which time Delcora had reached our car and had opened the trunk, as the boot is known in America. All I could think of was that I really hoped she had a plan to get us out of the situation. I thought it might be helpful to create a distraction, so calling on all my acting skills, I decided I would stumble while getting into the car. This did not elicit the reaction I was expecting. Rather than trying to help me up, I received a swift kick to the ribs, which knocked all the wind out of me and left me gasping for breath.
Get up and get in the car before I take my pistol to you.
Dot bent down and helped me into the back seat as slowly as she dared, which is when Delcora walked up to the man, holding out a large manila envelope in her left hand, and offered it to him. As he reached across to take the envelope, lowering his pistol as he did so, I heard Delcora say,
Sir, could you just tell me if we is in Canada or the States?
What the hell has that got to do with the matter?
Because I ain't never killed nobody in Canada.
Not that he got to hear what she said, as just before she spoke, there was a blast from a sawn-off double-barreled shotgun, which Delcora had been holding inside her overcoat next to her body.
Yeah, please feel free to clap. So what you have there is a reflection of fact, and obviously don't argue with this woman. So the situation is that the first part of the story, the first introduction within the story of Mary Corbett going to Canada, is how she gets a start, if you like, a notoriety as somebody who might be suitable for the Secret Service. I think we'll probably go on to the second reading now for me, so I'm going to give you some contextualization about that. So the story is progressed. As the inevitable war arrives, our heroine is recruited into the new section of the Secret Service. Her role is to interview potential recruits for the new section known as MI8, the Radio Secret Service. Her job requires her to visit the homes of potential recruits in and around London. She has a driver who takes her to the various locations in order for her to do so. The section she works for He's based in the Wormwood Scrubs.
It's a long reading. Yeah.
Though he didn't say it, I suspected Mr. Beales was happy that the visit had been somewhat shorter than the one the previous day. Our return to town was relatively uneventful, other than the fact that it was during an air raid. Based on how he was driving, it was obvious to me that Mr. Beales was no ordinary driver. And when we were held up by priority traffic, I couldn't resist asking him about this. Mr. Beales, how did you get to be such a good driver?
Thank you for saying that, miss. I really enjoyed it, and so few vehicles on the road these days, I get more of a chance to open her up, so to speak.
Yes, it did occur to me yesterday that this car seems, shall we say, to have more oomph about it than most.
It has, miss. It looks like a normal Vauxhall Light 6 DX, but the engine has been worked on so as to increase its performance. As to my driving, well, until 1938, I was a racing driver mechanic for hire. You know, Brooklands and the like. When I wasn't doing that, I was a cabbie.
What happened to stop you, Mr. Beales? Work commitments or family?
Bit of both, I suppose.
Oh, come on, do tell.
Well, for about 10 years, I've been a relatively successful driver, winning a few races here and there, and finishing the first 10 many a time. The problem was, I was having to compete with well-off people who had bigger cars, more money and the like. So the chances of me making any sort of regular living from racing was getting less and less. I did try being a driver for hire for a couple of years. Usually, I was a second driver in long-distance races, the sort where drivers change places at various times during a race. But it never sparked me up just driving my own car. Besides, when you're a driver for hire, you never got to finish a race. That's when the owner is in the driving seat. Then one day, just after Christmas, in '38, I was approached in my local by a man who said he heard that I was a fast driver, and did I want to make £100 for an hour's work. Now, I'm an East End lad, so I had a pretty good idea that the work wasn't kosher. But I thought I'd try it. More fool than me. It turns out there were two of them going to break into a big house up west. The plan, if you could call it that, was we would drive up about 1 AM on a Friday night. I would park the car somewhere close and quiet, keep a lookout. One or two likely lads broke in. They told me they'd heard from a reliable source there was a large amount of cash kept in a desk in the owner's study.
What happened, Mr. Beales?
I think it would be fair to say what could go wrong did go wrong. The car they stole from me looked really flash, but I could tell from the off that it hadn't been looked after. The other two said it was nonsense. I was just getting cold feet. They were wrong, and I was right. He gets to the place, and I find a street where one of the lamps is not working, so I parks up. Two of them steps out, telling me, keep the engine running, and off they went and did the job. So there I am, in the early hours of Saturday morning, parked up in a suburban street with the engine running. The two of them hadn't been gone about 10 minutes, then who should walk by but the old Bill. It's very hard not to draw attention to myself, but true to form, over he comes and taps on a window. As soon as I wind him into down, he asked me what I was doing there at that time of night. I'm just about to make up some story when, blow me, he recognises me from a motoring magazine he reads. All he wants to do on a cold night is chat about this driver, that race or some car or other, As you can imagine, I'd rather he was moving on. But no matter what hints I drop, he just stands there and rambles on. Then he says, "It's too cold to be standing around here while we were chatting." So I thought, great, he's off. But no such luck. Instead, he up and climbs in beside me. I'm really sweating now. So I offer to drop him off somewhere, and he says there's no rush. Nothing much happens in these parts at this time of night. Why now? 30 minutes is up. And I'm thinking the lads will be back soon enough, which they were. I look in the mirror and see them, I taking up the road, running as fast as their legs can carry them. Then I see why. There's two great big dogs hot on their heels. I think I need to get out of here, so I tell the old bull, my friends I've been waiting for are just coming, and would he mind getting out of the seat? He says, "Thanks for the chat. Mind how you go," and gets out the car. The lads are within 15 feet of the car now. So being the sort of chap he was, he decides to hold the door open for them. It seemed like the Keystone Cops. The two lads see the copper and decide to keep on running, and so did the dogs, barking and baying for blood, and a few seconds later, here comes three of the servants from the house they'd broken into. Each of them holding a club or stick, with some kind of screaming, "Stop! Thief!" at the top of their voices. Next, the copper only gets back in the car and tells me to drive after the two lads pronto-like. What was I supposed to do? Needless to say, we caught up with them in no time at all. He gets out, tells me to stay put. He draws his truncheon, trips the first lad, and then the second one who fancies his chances tries to take a swing at him. That didn't work too well. The copper catches him on the side of his leg with his truncheon, and down he goes, right on top of his mate, both of them howling. Then the dogs arrive and decide they need to fulfil their duty. So each takes it in turn to give the lads, well, a nibble or two. I'm thinking now would be a good time to be scarpering. So I push my foot down, and what do you know? The engine cuts out. And I sat there like a ripe lemon.
Oh dear, sorry to hear that, Mr. Beale.
I don't need to feel sorry, miss, it's my own fault. A couple of weeks later, it all ends up in the dock. The two lads, who had extensive experience, so to speak, no success, you understand, just experience, of the criminal justice system. Both went down for 4 years. The policeman gets a commendation from the chief constable and a promotion for outstanding police work. But because I'd actually not broken in, and the fact it was my first offence, I got 12 months. You'll never guess where I served my time, miss.
Where was it?
Only the scrubs.
No.
Now, I think we'll check to see if the refreshments are ready. Someone's going to look for me, that'll be grand. If they are, we'll cut a tea and a biscuit, then we're going to have an interview, and then we're going to have a question and answer session. Is that okay? Assume the teas and coffees are ready, that is. If not, just talk amongst yourselves. And now we return to the launch in time for the interview and Q&A session from the invited audience. Absolutely. And good friends of mine, Dot and Tony, a doctor of her reading and an excellent presentation as my mother, and Tony for his great artwork, which you'll see in the second book, which will be out next year. And well, My boys could look at the page, which I don't know what it means.
Sorry, I was looking at...
Okay, fine. Okay. Well, we're going to... Pardon me?
I'm going to thank you for something.
Thank you. Yes.
Me and your wife.
We've only got another hour and a half. It's not... If only we had the time, love, I would... yeah, that's it. Yeah, that tells me after. You should just shut us down. Yeah. Okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a question. We're going to have an interview first. So there's some questions to get things going. Please, if you want to ask a question, let Jan perhaps do the questions first, and then ask the questions you want to ask. And it can relate it to the book, the characters, the way in which it was put together, what my thinking is, which is unusual. Let's put it that way. Unusual. Yeah. Okay. So, Janet.
Right. Well, it's been quite an interesting afternoon so far, isn't it? And now we've got a list of questions. We had a bit of a meeting last week, one or two of us, and drew up with Mike's help some questions. So firstly, Mike, we'd like to know if this was your first attempt at writing and what motivated you into writing this novel.
Okay. That's an experience I've learned from lots of women. I just asked me two questions in one. The first part is about, it's not really my first attempt. I thought about this after we had the discussion last week, actually. I've currently got on my computer another novel, which is called A New King in America, which I actually started in 2009. But since Prince Harry moved over there, it's become a bit tricky. The premise of that is that there's an agreement when America becomes, I say independent, so that's aberration really, that if things don't work out well, that either country can invoke the agreement so that they become part of the Empire of the Commonwealth again. And for some particular reason, could it be a pandemic, could it be a financial crisis, could it be some sort of unrest because they have Herbert as a president, they decide they will revoke the agreement and a new king needs to be chosen for America. And then I put various stories in my head as to who comes forward, and they want to resurrect Elvis and other things. So that's one. The second thing I started writing again, this was only about 3 years ago, and that is, it's a musical. Yes, you're right to laugh, to be perfectly honest.
Set in sun?
No, that would be like Land of Narnia, isn't it? No, that would be based on, for those who have seen the film, the musical Buddy, this is a similar thing, but based on the music of the Drifters. And the way I've done that is I've set it in about 1958, 1960, and it would be a battle of the bands. Atlantic City is not that far from New York, and I've got two groups that go down, bands that go down in there, and they have a competition. And then the competition is that every week they have to write their own songs, but the songs they write are the Drifters songs. And then it follows a pattern, and there's gangsters involved and all the rest of it. So, but I don't know, I didn't quite follow that.
So those are two things that might be in the pipeline.
Well,
what motivated you to write this novel?
What motivated me? Boredom.
Boredom. Okay, that's my third question.
Oh.
Would you have written this if we hadn't been in lockdown?
Probably not, to be perfectly honest. I think what happened as we all experienced is that we had to change the way our lives were, our daily lives were. And although I think we're very fortunate living where we live, we've got a nice, lovely countryside around us. I take my dogs out twice a day, and sometimes they come back. And the truth is that because my other sort of main pastime, if you like, is rugby. Rugby stopped in March, so I had some time on my hands. Yes, my wife would tell you I had a lot of time on my hands. Other people tried to give me things to do, but I managed to sit on my computer instead. So yeah, but no, I probably wouldn't have done that.
So I understand it's part of a trilogy.
Yeah.
But how long did it take you just to write part one, if you like? Book one?
Not very long. I started on 15th of October and I finished by the end of May. And the reason it went on is because, and I learned from that experience, you learn, as you say, it's a trilogy. I'm now on book 3, and I've learned from doing book 1, book 2, book 3, and that is you need to do a lot more, I need to do a lot more research because I wanted to get into a fact-based sort of structure. And so I was finding myself writing, stopping to do a bit of research, finding some information and thinking, oh, I should include that. Oh, I don't want to include that. How will I shape the story around that? And I did my own editing, so I was going backwards and forwards, taking bits out. So
you were busy.
I was, but relatively speaking, it's like everything else. It's about time that you put into it, I suppose. What did happen in relation to that about speed is I got so far into the book, book one, the book. I initially intended to write just one book.
Right.
But if anybody's ever read War and Peace, it's about 800, nearly 900 pages, and this would have been bigger than that. So after getting to 65,000 words and 240 pages or whatever it is, I decided I'd have to have more than one book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good idea. If you were to categorise the novel, how would you describe it?
It's in two ways, I suppose. For those of you that have seen the television programme called The Midwife, it's a bit like that in as much as it's been recounted from the present day back to, in their case, the 60s. In my case, it's back to the 30s and the 40s. So it's a mature person telling her son what happened to her. In terms of its style or its genre, I suppose I would call it Downton Abbey with spies. Yeah, it's not a shoot 'em up, blow 'em up, kill 'em, running around, that sort of thing. It's I think probably more likely to what happened in the war than actually we see sometimes. It could have happened. Let's put it that way. But
could have happened.
It could have happened.
If you had a choice of being one of the characters in the book, which one would you choose?
So I quite like the thought of being my mum, really, because she pumps people off left, right and centre. Or my dad. My dad's another character in the book, so I suppose I'd quite like to be Commander Evans, I suppose.
Oh, we haven't heard about him yet.
No. Commander Evans. He comes into it in terms of he's involved in the radio side of things from the First World War. So that's book 4.
Interesting.
Mm.
Can you talk us through the process you went through in order to get the book published?
To get it published, yeah, okay. All right, I was very fortunate in that respect. Carrie and Richard were here. I thought about getting the book published. I saw something on television, and Richard was kind enough to introduce me to a lady who lives in the village, not far from them, one of their neighbours, who is a commissioning editor, I think is her title. I don't like to drop names, but she is actually the commissioning editor for the Bourne trilogy, the Matthew Bourne. And she was very kind. She gave me some suggestions as to the structure of the book and what I needed to do in terms of getting it published. It also, and so I did actually try. I sent emails to several agents, because the way forward, she felt, and was covered in the television program, was to get an agent who then was the one who would approach the publishers. And I got no response. Now I suspect if you look now, every week, basically every day on television, some personality or some celebrity has written a book about something or other. So maybe they didn't need books from somebody they'd never heard of about something they didn't know about in the first place. So then the question came to me, well, why am I writing the book? And I was writing the book because I wanted to write the book. And I was talking to Mike Neal. You may have seen the news that Wilbur Smith died recently. Very, very successful author. And Mike was telling me the story that was related when he was interviewed himself. And he said that when I wrote a book that in a style I thought other people liked or wanted, it was a flop. When I wrote a book that I wanted to write in the style I wanted to write it, it took off. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to be another Wilbur Smith. I mean, I'm not leaving that low for a start off, but I mean, no. So I wrote the book on the basis of I wanted to tell the story, and I'm an inquisitive sort of person. I have a curious mind, as lots of you here will know, and I wanted to try and see if I could do it. So I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. How historically correct is the book?
Pretty much. The storyline that weaves through it is obviously an imagination on my part, but the organisations that I talk about, the first thing we heard about was the trip to Canada. That happened. There was, it wasn't made public, but a representative of the government went there in 1938 to set up the air training schools. The Radio Secret Service, MI8, was based at Wormwood Scrubs. It did exist. There were volunteer interceptors recruited from across the country. They had several thousand in the end, the youngest of which was a 14-year-old boy, the oldest of which was a 72-year-old man. And their job was to listen for shortwave radio messages coming out of Europe. And in the book it mentions the fact that at Wormwood Scrubs, a chap called, yes, his name's got to come back to me, isn't it? It'll come back to me in a moment. Who was a very famous historian, and he actually broke, on his own, he broke the code that the German secret, the German army secret intelligence corps were using. He broke it on his own. A lot of talk is made about Bletchley Park, and in the premise of the book is that the information, the reports from the voluntary interceptors ended up at Wormwood Scrubs, where there was a big radio intercept station. And then they were sent, the messages weren't decoded there, they were sent to Bletchley Park, that's what they were sent to. And Wormwood Scrubs was bombed, so they had to move out. So they ended up in a place called Arkley View.
Are you related to any of the characters?
Well, as I said, first of all, lots of my friends' names appear in the books. They appear in book 1. Some of my friends who live in America, and some relatives of mine are in book 2, and in book 3, you are in book 3.
Oh, right, okay.
Mrs. Beals is in book 3. And who else is in book 3? I'm trying to think. Alistair is in book 3, yes, you've got right, thank you for reminding me of that. My mum, I use my mother's maiden name as the central character's name, which is very interesting because, like I said, the response I used to get was we'd speak in the week and she'd ask me how the book is coming along, and I said, yes, I've written another X number of pages, and she said, well, have I killed anybody yet? No, we're coming to that, Mother. And in book 2, she thinks this is exponential. I've mentioned at the beginning that she's killed 5 people, but she thinks book 1 is 1, book 2 is 2, well, that's 3 in book 3. Well, hang on, that would make 6. I'm not working on the basis of percentage rise, Mother. So, yes. I've used my mother's maiden name, I used my father's first 2 names as the character. Keith is mentioned, Keith Lawton, Major Lawton as I call him now. And Graham Jones, a good friend of ours, who's sadly not well at the moment. I'll tell you a little story if I may. Oh, there's Ron Gow. People here will know Ron Gow. Okay. So what I tried to do, Janet, you haven't asked me this question, but I'm going to tell you.
Might be here.
I tried to relate the choice of the name of character to the way in which I see them at the moment, or something would be equivalent. So, for example, when I had somebody who was very technically inclined, very attentive to duty, very attentive to the work that was being done and organisational skills, I used Keith. When I wanted somebody who was known for his driving prowess, I used Bob. So when I wanted somebody who would take part of the deputy controller of MI6, Graham Jones occurred to me. So I asked, as I did with everybody, I've asked them all if I can use their names. So I rang Graham and I said to Graham, Graham, I'd like to use your name as a character. What's the character's part? I said, who is deputy commander of MI6? He says, I said, I've given him, he said, he's got a rank. I said, yes. He said, well, I've got a rank. I said, have you? Yeah. I'm a lieutenant commander in the Royal Naval Reserve. I said, well, I was thinking of making you a commander. To which he replied, good Lord, he said, 75 promotion at last. But another one, if I may, just okay. So Ron Gow. So Ron, as most of you will know, is I would describe him as a larger-than-life character. So I said to Ron, I'd like to use your name. Yeah, what's the character? Retired Army General, First World War Army General. Right. First World War Army Officer, rather. And he said, what rank is he? What rank is he? I said, Colonel. He said, no. He said, I don't want to be in the book unless I'm a Brigadier General. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. I said, okay, you can be Brigadier General then. So he said, it's a Brigadier General. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
If you'd been alive at the time and doing some of these things, would you, could you see yourself in any of these characters?
It's very,
Brigadier General?
probably not. I'm certainly not a major in charge of a Secret Service department working with radios, that's for sure.
That's the driving?
No. I think there's a couple of people who would be a bit better than me at the driving, that's for sure. I don't know. You'd like to think, we don't know, but today of all days, when we remember those that gave everything in their lives and their lives for the freedom of the world, you'd like to think you would do something.
Step up, yeah.
I just think I might have been the person who was dull enough to stand up and start shooting, and people were going to be shooting back at me, but I don't know, Janet. Yeah.
Well, we know you're on the third of this trilogy.
Yeah.
What next?
Right, second, right, okay.
Do you need a pantomime perhaps?
I did say you are in it, Janet. What next? Okay, well the second book, I can tell you, what happened was that, I'll give you what triggered me to come up with the story. I'd read two books during the lockdown, early part of the lockdown. One was a book by Kate Atkinson called Transcriptions, which is set in the war, and it's about a particular part of and this again was factual, because there was a threat of invasion in 1940, MI6 set up a group of people, a double agent, it wasn't double agent, just somebody in London. They rented two apartments in a nice area of London, side by side. One chap posed as a Gestapo agent in London, and through various means he got people to come to talk to him about their thoughts and ideas. But what of course was happening, the conversations were being bugged, being put on disc, being recorded, transcribed, and the thinking was that if we weren't invaded, we were going to get those people first, and if we weren't invaded, we were going to get those people first. So that was one part of the story. And one of my characters is involved in that sort of department, if you like, she has that role. The other thing was I read a book called Pegasus Bridge. Now, I think most of you here will know about Pegasus Bridge, and that is the landings that were done on the early hours of D-Day by gliders to take two bridges which they had to be taken to stop either to allow the forces to get off the beaches of Normandy, they were about 9 kilometres inland, or if the Germans came back the other way in force, they would blow them up. So they had to land as quietly as possible so that the Germans didn't blow them up before they got there. And the reason that's written by a chap called Stephen Ambrose, who's probably most famous for writing Band of Brothers. And I thought about it, and Susan's aunt and her father worked for GCHQ. They both worked for the equivalent departments in wartime. My father-in-law spent some time at Bletchley Park. My wife's aunt, Helen, spent time working as an intercept officer in a place in Knockholt in Kent. But she married late in life. She married at age 55, and she married the controller of the Leek in Staffordshire. There's a radio communication place there. And he, Johnny Walker, and don't make a name up when you got a name like Johnny Walker, he was on the raid. He was a sergeant in the Airborne Division, and he told me, because we had several conversations about it, about what happened on that raid. Now I can't actually write what he wrote because although Stephen Ambrose is fairly graphic about it, it was a bit messy than perhaps we think it was. But I then thought of a storyline which was, okay, so what if there was one piece of intelligence that was required to come out from there so that they could carry out the raid successfully. I shan't tell you what it is, it'll be a surprise.
Is this in book 3
This
or
is in book 3. 3.
Yeah.
No, it's book 3. I'll tell you why about book 3.
Is it
Because
a trilogy?
yeah, it would have been a trilogy. The aim was that I would write a book about that.
Oh, right.
But when I started writing, I thought, well, I'd like to give the person some backstory, which is the problem I had, because after 65,000 words, I'd got to October of 1940.
Yeah.
So unless to get to 1944, you need, as Bob said, you need a sack truck to carry everything around, and somebody to pop it in bed, which is why it ended up being a trilogy.
Right.
So that was the spark. The spark was those 2 books. So I got the beginning or the middle bit and the end bit.
And you've got your trilogy. What I really wanted to know if there's anything else in the
You buy it on task. Yeah, no, I can tell you. I can tell you, yeah. I had in mind, I could write 2 more books. The way I set the storyline up is that, and you should write about what you know. So the central character, Mary, is born and brought up in a village in Herefordshire. Now, it's this village. And I've been lucky enough to know Mike Rogers quite well. And Mike Rogers has told me about, Mike Rogers is 87 years now. He remembers all what was this village was like before the Second World War. So I've been able to sort of tap into what he talks about, and I've put a lot of those things in. So, but the father of the central character, was a naval officer in the First World War. Have you ever heard of the Zinnemann telegram? Will do if you read my 4th book.
Okay.
And the 5th book.
Is it all running one to the next? Is this?
No, well, chronologically, 3 books are,
The trilogy.
yeah, 42 to 44, or 38 to 44.
So these will be separate characters?
No, same character. Well, yes, the one central character will be the father, and Commander Jones will be in that as well.
Alright.
And that will be based in the First World War, and what we did in terms of radio instruction then. But then I've been triggered another thought, which is the central character is training as a barrister. So when the war is over, she qualifies as a barrister, and of course then we have the Nuremberg trials in 48. So I thought we'd send her back, because I might well introduce her to Rudolf Hess. Rudolf Hess came over in 41, jumped out of an aeroplane just over Scotland, and then he was confined. He was first taken to Camp X, which is Mitchell's Place, it's near Guildford, but he spent the majority of the war in Abergavenny. Really a little boy in an asylum, which is where he should be.
Gosh,
Yeah.
in those days.
Yes.
What formats is the book available?
Well, currently there's the hard copies over there, which are available in very reasonable prices, and you can get it from Amazon as a published book, or you can have it as a Kindle version.
You can get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, finally, for me anyway, what advice would you give to anyone thinking of writing a book?
Yeah, I'll go back to what Mike was telling me about Wilbur Smith, and I was talking to you earlier on about that, and I think you should. When Richard was very kind enough to introduce me to the lady Eve, who is a professional book editor and commissioner, and a high power sort of end of the market. It made me think, well, why am I writing it? Why I was writing it, and what I would say to anybody is, write the book you want. Write the book that you feel comfortable with. Yeah. At the end of the day, we've got, I don't know, 35 people, 40 people here today. Some people will like it more than others. I think the second book is better than the first. But without reading the first, you won't understand the second. And the third, I think, will be different again. Because, like most of things in life, when you practice and understand, I did more planning for book 2. I've done even more planning for book 3. Okay. So, yeah. So if you are going to write, first of all, what I would say now is, if you want to write. Do it, because there's no harm. You're not harming anybody, or you're really doing something for yourself.
Like everything else, isn't it? If there's something there you want to do,
do it
now. None of us
never doubt yourself. There's people who will queue up to do that for you. Okay.
Well, I think that's all I've got. Is there anything else anybody else would like to ask Mike?
Mike, you obviously enjoy what you're doing, writing, etc. Have you thought about doing your other favourite pastime, something on rugby?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I know a lot of people, and I've known a lot of people over the last sort of 40 years, I suppose, that I've been involved in rugby, and there are some really unusual and comical things that I could write about there. I haven't really, well, I may get to that. But yeah, there are other things that attract me. I'm a bit of a butterfly, to be honest, in terms of I would probably find something else to entertain me. But yeah,
I'm sure you could find some interesting.
There are
things.
some hysterical things that happened in changing rooms and referee changing rooms you wouldn't believe. I'll tell you one little thing for me. But most of you will know, I've heard perhaps, if anybody's involved in rugby, like Tony Spreadbury, very notorious, for want of a better word, a lovely man. Tony Spreadbury was a top-class international referee, and he was refereeing at Newcastle. This would be about 15, 20 years ago, I suppose. No, it must be. Tony's not very tall, and at the time the game had just gone professional, and they'd just got into the ice bath system to get rid of the lactic acid in the body after the game, so they recover quicker. Well, they hadn't invested in actual ice baths, so what they were using, believe it or not, they were using wheelie bins. So they used to put and some of them did for quite some time. They put loads of ice in the wheelie bins, and the guys would lower themselves, step in and lower themselves. Well, Newcastle had lost, and they weren't very happy about Spreaders, or the decisions he made, which is sometimes natural, I suppose. So they picked him up and put him in the wheel bin. Well, he couldn't get out, and they weren't inclined to help him. So in the end, after about 15 minutes, they sort of took him out. He was never quite the same again. Yeah. Mary, you are on that?
Yes, I just wanted to know is, as a youngster,
yeah,
did you have a chance of wanting to read English, write English, and has that something from an early age stayed with you so that you're now going to be the successful author?
Very kind of you to say so. True, but very kind. The story I can relate to about that, Mary, is that as a child I would have been about 6, I suppose, and as was the way of it then, I don't know what it is now, but the children in the class were all asked to come outside, come up front and read to the class. So I did. And when the day was over, my mother came to collect myself and my brother, and the teacher, Mrs. Hall, said, "Come here, Mary." I would have thought, sit down now. So she said, I was sitting in the class, he was reading to the class, and everything was going really well, they were all paying attention. And I looked at the book and I thought, he's not reading the story, he's just making it up. And she said, I didn't have the heart to stop him because everybody seemed to be quite enjoying it. So I think that, and yeah, I suppose I've been very fortunate, and I've been let loose in this village over the years, Mary writing various things. Where's Dottie?
There.
Dottie, I can't see you. She's in the wheelie bin. Yeah, she's in the wheelie bin. As was remarked, we had a read through last Sunday, and as was remarked at the time, you're not reading the words that are down on the paper, Mike. And I said, well, that's nothing new, is it, to be perfectly honest?
When you change everything, you should go.
Yes, we've had moments where the glance directs have come back to me from across the stage. I'm quite withering really, but I just ignore them. The worst thing is to get Max on the stage with me because he's just as bad. And then we're off and running on various things. None of us know what's going on. But yeah, I've always had an inclination towards that. I've read quite a bit. And yeah, I'm very fortunate to have the chance to express myself in this way.
Thank you.
Pete. Oh, Major.
So, if we think back to where you started from to where you are today, what would you say has been your greatest challenge along this journey of writing your 3 books?
Research?
Well, sort of. I mean, the world of the internet has given us research opportunities far greater than really. What's been well.
Ended a pen that works.
Well, I do it on the computer. I type it on the computer, but I suppose my biggest, as is mentioned in the book actually, is an acknowledgement to a lady that lots of you would know, Al Guyford, because she, I think I phrased it, she corralled my rather maverick use of the English language, especially the comma, which I sort of literally sprinkled about all over the place. So I think keeping to the storyline, because what I think I found, like Jan mentioned research, I researched one thing and it would trigger me into thinking, well, I could include that. It's knowing how to contain it, really, to be perfectly honest. And I've no doubt, my sister-in-law, Hilary, has read the book. She gave me some feedback as well on the way it's presented, if you like, and that's for characterisation. So she said it needed more of that, so I've gone back to book 2 and put some more characterisation into that, to be honest. So that probably would be.
I'm interested in, you talk about a trilogy.
Yeah.
Your publishers must have a lot of confidence in you in that the first book has not sold anything at this moment. Now, God forbid it won't happen, but if the first book bombs, will there be a need for number 2 and number 3?
Well, there's two things I'd like to say. First of all, you're not getting out of here without buying. No, the truth is I chose to self-publish, so I am the publisher, and I have absolute confidence. I don't like to understate things. I think from my point of view, I'm quite relaxed about it, Peter. I'm not saying I don't care if people don't buy the book, or I don't sell in dozens or hundreds. I didn't write it for that purpose. It was a challenge to me to try and do something I'd never done before, and with the help of good friends and some supports and introductions, I've done it now, and I know how to do it again, and I probably will until such time as something else catches my attention, I suppose. But yeah, you're right, it would be a big bet for somebody else, but not for me. Oh, your last question is just putting your coat on. Yeah, David.
Have you any opinion on these academic courses on creative writing that seems to be popular with institutions these days?
Yeah, have I an opinion? I suppose the answer is no, I haven't an opinion, because I can't give an opinion on something I've never experienced. I have got a very good friend who lives in Newcastle who has taken that on board, and so far he's written several short stories, maybe I think 10,000 words, something like that. No, I think David, it would no doubt help in terms of, it depends what you want to do. If you just want, again, come back to the point, if you want to write a novel or write a story or whatever, and tell people the story that you have inside yourself, then I think you could probably, I think most people could probably do it. Maybe people don't believe they could do it, but it's getting that motivation to start and to get some form shape and just, it's, you know, the dread thing about, I don't suffer the lack of words very much, David, as you probably appreciate. So it's getting started, and you can always, the great thing now about whether you handwrite it freehand or if you do use a computer, you can go back and you can edit it. So I have no opinion on that was a good or a bad thing. It probably wasn't for me. Circumstances, as we talked about earlier on, contrived that I had time and I had the desire to do it. So I did it basically.
I've known a couple of people who have gone on these courses,
yeah,
and it's been like a lead balloon for them.
I suppose it depends on the expectations and what you expected to get from it, what you expect the outcome to be. And the reality is, as in most things in life, you'll get out of it what you put into it. So if you want to, give it a bash. You know, you can become the second best known author in a certain sense. Carrie?
Mike, can I ask you, without sort of suggesting that you didn't try hard, can I ask you how hard you tried to get a publisher?
I didn't. I think because I was...
That's what I wondered, because actually Eve's advice would be good.
Yeah.
And she and a friend of mine, both writers,
yeah,
and they both have worked with some of
yeah.
And I just think you have to keep banging on the door.
Well,
because somebody suddenly grabs them. It's very peculiar how it works.
Yeah, I thank you for that, and I don't doubt that at all. I suppose what occurred to me was, I wanted to do it, and I am task orientated, so I wanted to get it done.
Yeah.
I didn't get any response, and maybe I should have persevered, but I wasn't writing it on the basis of wanting to be a bestseller. Yeah. I wanted to write it because I wanted a book, but to write a book or a series of books. So I take the point, and that may well be the case. The rumours about Netflix are over-exaggerated.
Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime, yes.
If you get signals.
Well, if you get yeah. Good spot. Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you.
What?
Plans of dramatising the first book?
Well, I think, in fact, not just the first book. I'm like maybe a lot of people in the room today. I'm a child of the 50s, so I came up through television, and television at that time, like Saturday morning cinema, is episodic. So I write in that fashion. So my chapters are relatively short, and there's a lot of dialogue. So it would convert very easily. The mother, I'm talking to the mother of a television script writer, so it would convert, it could well do that. And as I said, then of course we're into, as has been discussed with several people, well, who would play my part? Said Mr. Gow. Sorry, Brigadier Gow. So it would work. I think it would work because it works in my head that way. I see the story unfolding. So when I talk about the characters walking down the street, for example, I have an imagination of that happening. So, yeah.
I have somebody you could probably show.
Yes, well, that would be very... Okay, you can all go. Problem solved, Carrie. Yes.
Any others? Any other questions?
Yes.
Having it edited properly
by
someone, what do you think of the computer editing? Is it?
I think the computer is, well, as someone who, as I say, has a random approach to the use of punctuation, it isn't foolproof. I think what I would say is that in terms of, before you get to the editing part of it, the first thing I would do is you do your first draft, which you will read and you will get somebody else to read for you, but the reality is you become word blind. You don't see the words, you think you've written something. It's like when we read sometimes, we don't read all the words, we read the shape and form. So I would say the first thing to do is to get somebody to read it. If you want it read professionally, I don't know how much it would cost. I suspect there would be companies who would more than likely do that for you. In fact, one of the things I found was an editing company that would read. I can't remember, they would print a copy for you as well. I think they would send like £1,500. That may be the average, I don't know. I was very lucky that I had Ali Guildford, who is a retired English school teacher. And so she taught English in schools. She's English, she's English. And she was very good in terms of she didn't change the storyline. She said, I won't do that. What I'll do is I will read obviously, go through, look for what I think are grammatical errors. For some bizarre reason, I put Nazis with an apostrophe S. No big deal I did that. I mean, there were more than one of them, admittedly, but I just. So she got that. The other thing she spotted, which is very handy for me, and this is, you think you know these things or assume these things. Early part of the book, just after the incident in Canada that we had the reading about, I mentioned the fact that the central character debated at the Oxford Union. And Al said no, she couldn't have done, because women were not allowed to debate at the Oxford Union until 1961. And there goes the empire. So she spotted a couple of things like that. I had one of the characters in the book was originally called Lady Martha Camus. And I said she would use it on the basis of if somebody thought she was related to Camus, the famous French writer, that she would not disavow not that thing. But in 1938, Camus was a newspaper man. He wasn't known for writing, so she spotted that as well. So it's now Lady Martha Dumas. Just seeing you haven't changed everything else, I changed the French writer's name. But for me, it was a matter of getting the sort of correction from the grammar point of view. As far as the editing is concerned, I think you've got to have a feel for that. And if you've got somebody you trust who will say to you, and it's only an opinion, there's a quote at the front of the book from a Roman Stoic emperor called Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius said, or is quoted as saying, What we hear is only an opinion, it is not a fact. What we see is only a perspective, it is not the truth. So, if it's in here, it's probably okay. Okay. Any others? Well, all I would like to say is to say thank you to Janet, thanks to the people, Max, Annette, and where's Doc? Yes, I know. Yeah. I can't really tell, can I, to be perfectly honest? And to Keith and to Anne, and to all of you for coming. It's been a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you. And no doubt you'll mention this in your memoirs, as I will. And the video that we've got will be put onto the World Wide Web for the wonderment of all and sundry. I've seen some of the things on the World Wide Web, and trust me, this is okay. So I thank you all very much, and I trust you have a good day. Good afternoon. And if you would like to purchase the book, well, they are available, and I will inscribe them if you wish me to. Thank you very much. Thank you. I trust you enjoyed watching the book launch. For those of you who are interested in buying a copy of Transmissions, it is available in printed form and on Kindle. The ISBN is 978 191 618 0390.